My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old, and tonight I need you to hear my story. It's not just about a broken greenhouse worth $22,000. It's about the night my family showed me exactly where I stood in their hearts. My brother Jason Carter destroyed everything I had built with my own two hands. My parents Linda and Robert Carter begged me to forgive him, and when I refused, they called me cruel. Before I take you through that night, I need you to hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why I had no choice but to walk away from the people who raised me. I still remember the sound. Glass cracking, wood splintering, and my plants, the ones I'd nurtured like children, crushed beneath Jason's boots. It didn't happen in some heated moment of confusion. No, Jason had been planning this, waiting for me to say no, waiting for the day I refused to hand him something he didn't earn. And when I said, "Jason, I can't hire you. I need people who take this work seriously," his face turned dark, almost unrecognizable. Jason had always been like that, charming on the outside, reckless on the inside. When we were kids, he was the golden boy. If he broke a window, my dad would laugh it off. If he failed a test, my mom would make excuses for him. Meanwhile, if I came home with a B instead of an A, I was slipping. If I cried, I was dramatic. That night, as I watched shards of glass scatter across the soil, I realized nothing had changed. Jason was still their son who could do no wrong, and I was still the daughter who was expected to forgive. "Emily, just let it go," my mom whispered, her hand squeezing my arm as though she could physically hold back my anger. "We'll figure it out, honey. Don't ruin your relationship with your brother." Ruin my relationship? I wanted to scream. Jason had ruined more than a relationship. He had ruined my livelihood. That greenhouse wasn't just some fancy structure in the backyard. It was my dream, my business, my safe place. I'd spent years saving for it, building it, learning how to grow the rare orchids and vegetables that customers came from across town to buy. To see it ripped apart in seconds was like watching my future go up in flames. Jason stood there smirking, hands in his pockets like he hadn't just caused over $20,000 in damage. "Relax, Em," he said. "It's just a bunch of plants. You'll get over it." That was my breaking point. It wasn't the money, though that loss cut deep. It was his complete lack of remorse, his arrogance, and the way my parents nodded along with him like he was making sense. My father even muttered, "Emily, don't blow this out of proportion. Families forgive each other." I stayed at the mall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would crack open my ribs. For years, I'd told myself that my parents didn't mean to favor Jason, that they didn't realize how unfair it was. But in that moment, watching them dismiss me, I finally understood. They knew exactly what they were doing. Jason was their priority. I was expendable. So I did something none of them expected. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and started recording. "Jason Carter," I said clearly, my voice shaking with both fury and determination. "You just destroyed my greenhouse. This is vandalism, and I'm pressing charges." Jason's smirk vanished, replaced with a flicker of panic. "What the hell, Emily? You can't be serious." But I was. And when I dialed the police, my parents reacted like I had stabbed them in the back. "Don't you dare," my mother hissed, her face pale. "Emily, please, don't do this. He's your brother." "He's a criminal," I shot back. The ride to the police station felt surreal. My parents bombarded me with messages, begging, bargaining, even offering me money to drop the case. "We'll pay for the damage," my father texted. "Just tell the police it was an accident." But it wasn't an accident, and their hush money only made me angrier. They weren't sorry for what Jason did. They were sorry I refused to cover it up. That night, sitting in the harsh light of the police station, I realized something painful but freeing. My family didn't want peace. They wanted silence. They didn't care that I had been wronged. They only cared about protecting Jason. And if I stayed quiet, I'd be betraying myself. It hurt. God, it hurt more than anything. But as the officer took my statement and I signed the report, I knew I was doing the right thing. For once in my life, I wasn't letting them decide who I was or what I deserved. And that, right there, was the night they shut me out for good. The morning after filing the police report, I woke up to silence. Not the comforting kind, the silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is pressing down on you. My phone, which usually buzzed with messages from my mom or dad checking in on small things, lay dark on my nightstand. No good morning, no we'll stop by later, no calls. Just silence. It didn't surprise me. I knew that by going to the police, I had crossed an invisible line with my family. For them, protecting Jason had always been the unspoken rule, the one thing you never broke. And I had broken it. But still, a part of me had hoped that maybe this time they would stand with me. That hope died the moment I stepped outside and saw what was left of my greenhouse in the daylight. The destruction was worse than I remembered. Panels of glass lay shattered across the yard like jagged ice. The wooden beams I had carefully sanded and painted were splintered and bent. Plants I had nurtured for years, some of them rare orchids, some vegetables that were almost ready for market, were ripped apart, trampled into the dirt. My greenhouse had been more than just a structure. It was my dream, my livelihood. Seeing it reduced to rubble was like standing over the ashes of a home that had burned down. I dropped to my knees and cried. Not the quiet, restrained crying I had learned to do as a child when my parents told me not to make a scene. This was raw, ugly sobbing, the kind that shakes your whole body. I cried for the money I had lost, for the years of work erased in one violent night. But most of all, I cried because the people I thought would stand by me had chosen someone else. When I finally dragged myself inside, I saw the messages waiting on my phone. My mother had written, "Emily, please think about what you're doing." Jason didn't mean it. He was upset. You know how he gets. Families forgive. Then another from my father. "We can give you the money to rebuild. Just tell the police it was a misunderstanding. Don't destroy your brother's life over this." And finally, from Jason himself. "You're pathetic. I told you no one would side with you. Drop it before you embarrass yourself." That last one burned the most. I didn't reply to any of them. For the first time in my life, I decided that silence would be my weapon. The days that followed were brutal. I barely ate. Sleep came in short, restless stretches. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason smirk, my father's disappointed glare, my mother's pleading expression. Their voices echoed in my head. "Don't ruin your relationship. Families forgive. You're being cruel." But when the noise got too loud, I forced myself back outside to the ruins of my greenhouse. At first, it hurt too much to even look at it. But slowly, almost instinctively, I began cleaning, sweeping away the shards of glass, gathering the broken beams into piles, salvaging whatever plants I could, replanting them in makeshift pots inside my garage. It was backbreaking, lonely work. Neighbors would walk by, glancing at me with pity but saying nothing. A few friends reached out, offering to help, but I turned them down. This was something I needed to do myself. Maybe I was stubborn, maybe even foolish, but deep down I knew rebuilding wasn't just about the greenhouse. It was about me. Every nail I pulled from the wreckage, every handful of soil I saved, was a small act of defiance. A way of saying, "You didn't break me, Jason, and you never will." Still, there were nights I almost gave up. Nights when the weight of it all, the financial loss, the betrayal, the isolation, pressed so hard on my chest that I could barely breathe. One night, I sat in the garage staring at the half-dead plants I'd rescued, and I whispered to myself, maybe they are right. Maybe I should just let it go. But then I remembered something my grandmother once told me before she passed. She had been the only one in my family who ever truly believed in me. She used to say, "Emily, strength doesn't come from who stands with you. It comes from who you decide to be when no one's watching." That night, I made a choice. I wouldn't just rebuild. I would rebuild bigger, better, and stronger. Not to prove anything to Jason or my parents, but to prove it to myself. I started small. I researched affordable greenhouse materials, applied for small business grants, and reached out to online communities of gardeners and entrepreneurs. To my surprise, strangers were more supportive than my own blood. People sent me advice, encouragement, even offered to donate seeds and equipment. Every kind word felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. It wasn't easy. I worked double shifts at my part-time job to save up. I skipped outings, birthdays, anything that cost money I didn't have. My hands were blistered, my back ached, and more than once I found myself crying on the floor after another 12-hour day. But little by little, progress came. Months later, when the frame of the new greenhouse finally stood tall against the sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not the shallow kind you get from praise, but the deep, bone-level pride of knowing I did this. I built this with no one's help but my own. My parents didn't visit. Jason never apologized. To them, I was still the villain for ruining his life. But by then, I didn't care. The silence that once suffocated me had transformed into something else. Freedom. Because here's the truth I want anyone listening to hear. Sometimes, the family you're born into will never see you for who you are. Sometimes, they'll silence you, dismiss you, even betray you. And when that happens, you have two choices. Break under the weight of their expectations, or climb back stronger than they ever imagined. I chose to climb. The day I walked into the police station to file the official report, my hands were trembling. Not because I doubted myself, I didn't, but because I knew what it meant. Once the words were written down, once my signature dried on that paper, there would be no turning back. This wasn't just about a destroyed greenhouse anymore. This was about holding my brother accountable, and in my family's eyes, that made me the ultimate traitor. The station smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. A tired-looking officer behind the desk looked up at me, his brow furrowing when he noticed my clenched fists. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'd like to report a case of vandalism. The person responsible is my brother." The words felt strange on my tongue. My brother. For years, those words had been a shield. Jason was my brother, the one I was supposed to protect, to forgive, to excuse. But now, those words were evidence, tying him directly to the crime that had shattered my life. The officer handed me a clipboard. "Fill this out, and we'll get an officer to take your statement." As I sat there writing, my phone buzzed with message after message. My mom, my dad, even Jason. I ignored them all. My pen dug into the paper as I spelled out the details, the date, the time, the damage. When I reached the line that asked for relationship to the accused, I hesitated for a long moment before scrolling. Sibling. When the officer finally called me into the small interview room, I told him everything. The threats Jason had made, his anger when I refused to hire him, the smirk on his face as he kicked through my greenhouse like it was nothing, the way my parents begged me to let it go. The officer listened carefully, nodding at intervals. He didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me, didn't tell me I was overreacting. For the first time since the incident, I felt like someone was taking me seriously. When he asked if I had evidence, I pulled out my phone and showed him the video I had recorded the night it happened. Jason's face clear in the frame, his voice unmistakable, his destruction undeniable. The officer leaned back in his chair. "This is strong evidence," he said. "We'll move forward with charges." A part of me wanted to cry with relief. Another part of me wanted to vomit, because I knew what was coming next. By the time I left the station, my phone had 20 new messages. I listened to one voicemail from my father, his voice low and furious. "Emily, what the hell do you think you're doing? You can't drag your own brother into court. This will ruin his life. Call them back and tell them it was a mistake. Do it now." Another from my mom, softer but just as sharp. "Honey, please. You're angry. I get it. But don't let anger make you do something you'll regret. Jason's family. Family forgives. And then Jason himself. You think you've won? You're pathetic. I'll make sure you regret this. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The easy thing to do would have been to cave, to call the officer back, to say I'd been emotional, to let Jason off the hook the way my parents wanted. But every time I thought about giving in, I saw the shards of my greenhouse on the ground. I heard Jason's laugh. I remembered the way my parents looked at me like I was the problem, not him. No, I couldn't back down. Not this time. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. A detective came by to photograph the damage, to collect my video as evidence. Neighbors whispered, shocked that a sister would press charges against her own brother. Some called me brave. Others called me heartless. But none of them knew what it felt like to be invisible in your own family, to have your pain dismissed as drama. My parents stopped coming around altogether. At family gatherings, my name was never mentioned. My aunt texted me once, saying, I don't know what's going on, but your parents are devastated. Can't you just drop it? I didn't reply. Inside, I was devastated too. Every night, I lay in bed wondering if I had made a mistake. Not legally. I knew Jason was guilty. But emotionally, could I live with being the one who finally shattered the illusion of family we'd been pretending to have? Then I remembered the way Jason had stood there, glass crunching under his boots, mocking me. He hadn't just destroyed a greenhouse. He had destroyed every ounce of trust one had left. And my parents, they hadn't tried to stop him. They hadn't defended me. They had defended him. So yes, I could live with it. The first court hearing was small. Just me, Jason, and our lawyers. Jason wouldn't even look at me. My parents sat behind him, their faces stony, refusing to meet my eyes. When the judge asked me to recount what had happened, my voice shook, but I didn't break. I told the truth. Every word. When it was Jason's turn, he rolled his eyes and said, She's overreacting. It was an accident. The video I had taken played on a screen for everyone to see. His smile, his laugh, his words. The silence in the courtroom after the video ended was deafening. For the first time, Jason's confidence faltered. I wish I could say that moment made me feel vindicated. But honestly, it just made me sad. Sad that my brother had become this person. Sad that my parents had chosen to enable him. Sad that the people I loved most couldn't see the truth even when it was right in front of them. But I also felt something else. Strength. Because while they sat there, united in denial, I stood alone in truth. And as painful as it was, it felt cleaner than the lie I'd been living all my life. By the end of the hearing, the judge scheduled another date. Jason's lawyer whispered to him furiously. My parents walked out without a word to me. But I walked out with my head high. Because no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I had finally broken free of their control. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being the bad guy. I was finally ready to be the strong one. They say every family has a moment, the one that defines them, the one you can never come back from. For me, that moment didn't happen in the courtroom. It didn't even happen the night Jason destroyed my greenhouse. No, my breaking point came weeks later, in the quiet of my parents' living room. When I realized the truth I had been running for my whole life, I was never going to matter to them the way Jason did. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. My mom had called me out of the blue, her voice unusually soft. Emily, can you come over? We just want to talk. Please. I almost didn't go. Every instinct screamed that it was a trap, another attempt to manipulate me into dropping the case. But some part of me, the daughter who still longed for her parents' approval, couldn't resist. So I drove to the old house, the one I grew up in, where the walls still carried the faint scent of my mother's cooking and the carpet was worn from decades of footsteps. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The tension. My father sat stiffly in his recliner, arms crossed. Jason lounged on the couch, looking smug, like he'd already won. My mother hovered near the doorway, wringing her hands. Emily, my father began, his voice firm. We need to put an end to this nonsense. Jason made a mistake. You've made your point. Now it's time to drop the charges and move on. I stared at him, stunned. Move on? Dad, he destroyed my business. He hasn't apologized. He hasn't shown 1 ounce of regret. How am I supposed to move on from that? Jason smirked, leaning back against the couch cushions. Because you're overreacting. Like always. That word, always, hit me like a slap. Suddenly, I wasn't 28 years old anymore. I was 10, crying because Jason had ripped the head off my favorite doll, and my parents told me, stop being so dramatic. I was 16, grounded for staying out too late while Jason snuck out every night without consequence. I was 21, working 2 jobs to pay for college while Jason blew through money my parents gave him without a care. It was always the same story. Jason broke the rules. I paid the price. Jason hurt me. I was told to forgive. Jason was the golden boy, and I was the girl who was too emotional. The memories crashed over me, one after another, until I felt like I was drowning. No, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm not doing this anymore. My mother stepped forward, tears brimming in her eyes. Emily, please, don't tear this family apart. And that's when it hit me, the breaking point, the moment of absolute clarity. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing Jason. To them, family meant protecting him at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing me. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. This family was torn apart a long time ago. You just didn't notice because I was the one holding it together. But I'm done. Jason rolled his eyes. God, you're so dramatic. All this over some stupid plants. Something inside me snapped. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. It's not about the plants, Jason. It's about respect. About accountability. About the fact that you've spent your entire life getting away with everything while I was told to shut up and take it. Well, I'm not shutting up anymore. The room went silent. For the first time, Jason didn't have a comeback. My father's jaw tightened, his face red with anger. My mother looked like she was about to cry. But I didn't back down. I am not dropping the charges, I said firmly. And if that means you never speak to me again, so be it. I'd rather be alone than live in a family where my pain doesn't matter. I walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, cold and sharp. You're a disgrace, Emily. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. For years, I had feared those words. I had lived my life trying to avoid them, bending over backward to earn their approval, to be the perfect daughter. And now, hearing them spoken out loud, I realized something. They no longer had power over me. I turned back, meeting my father's glare with a calmness I didn't know I had. No, I said quietly. I'm not a disgrace. I'm finally free. Then I walked out. The air outside was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Yes, I was walking away from my family. Yes, it hurt, but it also felt like stepping into sunlight after years of living in the shadows. That was my breaking point. Not the destruction of my greenhouse, not the courtroom, not even the endless messages begging me to forgive. My breaking point was realizing that I would never be enough for them, and deciding that I didn't need to be. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting for your family. Sometimes, it's walking away. They thought breaking me would silence me. Jason thought destroying my greenhouse would crush my spirit, and my parents believed cutting me off would force me back into their shadow. But what none of them understood was that destruction doesn't always end a story. Sometimes, it writes a new beginning. I spent the months after that final confrontation pouring every ounce of myself into rebuilding, not just the greenhouse, but my entire life. The first step was money. I had savings, but not enough to cover everything Jason had destroyed. So I worked hard. Double shifts at the local cafe. Freelance landscaping jobs. Late nights selling plants I had managed to salvage. Every dollar felt like another brick laid in the foundation of my freedom. There were nights when exhaustion dragged me to the floor. Nights when my hands blistered and my back ached. Nights when I questioned if I was strong enough to keep going. But every time doubt whispered in my ear, I remembered my father's words. "You're a disgrace." Those words didn't weaken me anymore. They fueled me. I wanted to prove him wrong. Not for his sake, but for mine. Slowly, the new greenhouse began to take shape. This time, I chose stronger materials, reinforced glass, and a design that wasn't just practical but beautiful. I painted the beams a soft white, strung lights along the ceiling, and built shelves wide enough to hold rows upon rows of thriving plants. The day the structure was complete, I stood inside and breathed in the scent of fresh soil. The sunlight streamed through the glass, casting golden patterns across the floor. It wasn't just a greenhouse anymore. It was a sanctuary. A house that stood because I refused to fall. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had once whispered behind my back now came by to congratulate me. Customers returned, impressed by the new design, and soon orders for plants and produce started rolling in. My business grew faster than I ever imagined. What Jason had tried to destroy had become the very thing that lifted me higher than before. But the true victory wasn't financial. It was emotional. For the first time in my life, I no longer craved my parents' approval. I didn't need them to validate me, to tell me I was enough. Because I finally believed it myself. Every seed I planted, every flower that bloomed under my care, was proof that I could create beauty even from brokenness. Jason, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his choices. The court didn't send him to prison, but he was fined heavily and ordered to pay restitution. My parents tried to cover for him, but the judge saw through their excuses. For once in his life, Jason couldn't laugh his way out of accountability. Did my parents forgive me? No. In their eyes, I was still the villain who had betrayed the family. They didn't visit, didn't call, didn't show up to see what I had built. But I stopped waiting for them to. Because the truth is, not everyone deserves a seat at the table of your success. And so, I learned to create my own table. One evening, months later, I sat in my greenhouse with a cup of tea, the soft glow of string lights surrounding me. Outside, the night was quiet, but inside, life thrived. Orchids in full bloom, vines climbing their trellises, vegetables ripe and ready for harvest. I thought about everything I had lost, but more importantly, everything I had gained. Peace, independence, strength. The greenhouse had become more than a business. It was a symbol. Proof that I could stand tall even when the people closest to me tried to tear me down. Proof that my worth wasn't defined by blood, but by the choices I made for myself. As I looked around, I realized something. This wasn't just the house that stood. I was the house that stood. Because families can break you. Betrayal can shatter you. But if you choose to rise, no one, not a reckless brother, not a biased parent, not the weight of years of unfairness, can keep you from becoming whole again. So I kept building, kept planting, kept living. And in the quiet glow of that greenhouse, I whispered to myself the words I had needed to hear all along. You're not a disgrace, Emily. You are enough. You always were.